About ongoing genocide in occupied East Turkestan. On behalf of President of East Turkestan government in exile, Ghulam Osman. Thank you.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. 33 years ago on this day, thousands of East Turkestanis in Baden and other parts of East Turkestan rose up in unison to protest against China's colonial and genocidal policies, as well as the Chinese occupation of East Turkestan. The East Turkestan government in exile and Alberta Uyghur Society remembers and honors the valor and spirit of the martyrs. We also remember the Uyghurs, Kazakhs, Kyrgyz, and other East Turkestanis in East Turkestan who continue to face genocide and enslavement at the hands of the Chinese invaders. Our thoughts and prayers are with them as we continue our fight for the liberation of East Turkestan and its people. In the past 7 decades, millions of Uyghurs, Kazakhs, Kyrgyz, and other East Turkestanis have perished as a result of China's brutal occupation and colonization of East Turkestan. Today we have gathered to mourn this loss collectively, but we are also here to recognize the unyielding fortitude of East Turkestani people in East Turkestan. They continue to protest and resist by defending and preserving our language, our religion, our land, our identity, despite the risk of death. On April 5, 1990, the people of Baden Township in East Turkestan rose up in protest of China's genocidal and colonial policies, which resulted in the forced abortion of Uyghur and other Turkic babies in an effort to reduce the Uyghur and other Turkic populations. East Turkestanis, led by Zaydin Yusuf, demonstrated against these genocidal policies. But the Chinese People's Liberation Army was dispatched to violently suppress the demonstrations. The brutal Chinese response confirmed that China, which had portrayed itself as a liberator since invading East Turkestan in 1949, was in fact a colonial genocide-committing oppressive invader. In response, the East Turkestani people took up arms to defend themselves, liberate their country from Chinese invaders, and restore East Turkestan's independence. The East Turkestan National Uprising of 1990 demonstrated to the world that the East Turkestani people had not abandoned their quest for independence. In addition, it demonstrated that the people of East Turkestan were more than willing to make the ultimate sacrifice to liberate their homeland and ensure their independence and existence. Unfortunately, the East Turkestan National Uprising of 1990 was brutally crushed in a massacre that served as a prelude to Chinese ongoing genocide in East Turkestan. Thousands of unarmed Uyghurs and other Turkic people were brutally slaughtered over the course of several days, and over 7,600 East Turkestanis were arrested, many of whom were subjected to torture, lengthy prison sentences, and executions. However, the sacrifices made by the courageous martyrs of the East Turkestan National Uprising of 1990 continue to inspire the East Turkestani people as they fight tenaciously for their national liberation and independence. The right of a nation to exercise its rights to self-determination and ensure its survival is enshrined in international law and respected by all democratic and free nations around the globe. Due to the fact that East Turkestan is not a part of China and has historically never been a part of China, the racist Chinese government and proponents of Chinese imperialism have resorted to wholesale genocide in order to permanently end East Turkestan's struggle for independence and turn it into a Chinese colony. Incorrectly, some claim that the Uyghurs and other Turkic peoples are being persecuted on the basis of their religion. However, the truth is that because they are the true owners of East Turkestan, the Uyghurs and other Turkic peoples of East Turkestan face genocide. China's ongoing campaign of genocide against Uyghurs and other Turkic peoples in East Turkestan is rooted in China's occupation and colonization of East Turkestan, an effort to eradicate East Turkestani people's continued and persistent fight for independence. In fact, leaked speeches by senior Chinese officials clearly state that millions of East Turkestanis have become, quote, influenced by pro-independence thought that must be corrected, end quote. Moreover, China's fear of East Turkestan independence is reflected in its national defense strategy, which lists, quote, preventing the creation of East Turkestan, end quote, as one of its top 4 national defense objectives. Since 2014, millions of Uyghurs, Kazakhs, Kyrgyz, and other Turkic peoples have been imprisoned in concentration camps, prisons, and enslaved in forced labor camps and slave factories throughout East Turkestan and parts of China as part of a systematic Chinese genocide campaign aimed at preventing East Turkestan's independence. Our culture and religion, our language, our identity, our history, our very existence is being systematically eroded in the 21st century. After the Holocaust of over 6 million Jews and millions of others, the international community, including Canada, promised that never again would they let such a genocide, such an atrocity ever occur. Yet in the year 2023, China's 21st century Holocaust-like genocide and crimes against humanity in East Turkestan continue unabated. Today, we again call on the international community, particularly the Canadian Parliament and the Canadian government, to uphold its promise of never again by introducing and passing new legislation and taking concrete action to truly end China's ongoing campaign of colonization, genocide, and occupation in East Turkestan. Similar to the conflict between Ukraine and Russia, the conflict between East Turkestan and China is an international conflict between an occupied nation and an unoccupied nation, and an occupying nation. East Turkestan is not China's so-called internal affairs, it is an occupied country. As such, we call on the Canadian Parliament to introduce and pass legislation recognizing East Turkestan as an occupied country, similar to Tibet, and calling for the East Turkestan-Sino conflict to be resolved. We call on the Canadian Parliament and the Canadian government to support East Turkestan's efforts to obtain justice by urging the International Criminal Court to accept the East Turkestan government in exile and East Turkestan National Movement's legal complaints by launching an investigation into China's ongoing genocide in East Turkestan and issuing an arrest warrant for Xi Jinping for genocide and crimes against humanity. The East Turkestan government in exile recently conducted a poll on Facebook and Twitter asking Uyghur and other East Turkestani citizens whether they prefer greater autonomy under China or an independent state as a solution to the ongoing conflict between East Turkestan and China. Approximately 99% of the more than 2,400 respondents favored an independent state as a solution to the ongoing conflict between East Turkestan and China. This demonstrates that the vast majority of East Turkestan's people support independence and oppose China's occupation. In light of these facts, we urge the Canadian Parliament and Canadian government to recognize, respect, and support the East Turkestani people's rights to external self-determination and their efforts to restore East Turkestan's independence. In conclusion, we again call on the Canadian Parliament and Canadian government to support the East Turkestan government in exile and treat East Turkestan similarly to Tibet. Thank you.
Thank you, Rashida. Thank you very much. Right now, I'm inviting Nuramin and Nur to read the demand of East Turkestani people to Canada. Thank you.
Good afternoon. Thank you all for joining us. Today, April 5th, is of particular importance for the people of East Turkestan. Today marks the 33rd anniversary of the 1990 Baden Uprising, which later became known as the Baden Massacre. In the spring of 1990, the Baden Township near Kashgar in Chinese-occupied East Turkestan suffered under a reign of Chinese terror unlike any other. As part of its decades-long campaign of colonization, forced assimilation, and population control, China's government was forcing Uyghur and other Turkic women to abort their babies. The villagers of Baden finally had enough. At the time, they had suffered under 41 years of Chinese colonization and occupation, and they had just seen 250 local women robbed of their babies. So they peacefully protested, and when that failed, they took up arms to defend themselves from the Chinese invaders. The Chinese occupation forces responded by flooding Baden Township with People's Liberation Army soldiers, and they began a massive massacre of innocent civilians, including women and children. According to different sources, anywhere from hundreds to thousands of innocent Uyghurs and other Turkic peoples were massacred with heavy weaponry and airstrikes. The tragedy in 1990 acted as a catalyst in China's decades-long campaign of colonization, genocide, and occupation. Yet, the Baden Uprising was also a clear sign of the East Turkestani people's will to resist colonization, genocide, and occupation. Today, the Baden Massacre continues on a daily basis with the oppression of millions of Uyghurs, Kazakhs, Kyrgyz, and other Turkic peoples who are currently locked up in concentration camps, prisons, and slave labor camps, where they are forcibly indoctrinated, tortured, raped, sterilized, and even killed for their organs. Remote villages across East Turkestan, like Baden, continue to face ethnic cleansing and extermination campaigns under Chinese occupation. It has now been 8 years since China officially launched its campaign of genocide against Uyghurs, Kazakhs, Kyrgyz, and other Turkic peoples in East Turkestan in 2014. The UN and other major international bodies have remained silent. The silence of the UN has led the US government and the parliaments of Canada, the UK, Belgium, the Netherlands, Lithuania, the Czech Republic, and France to officially designate China's barbaric treatment of Uyghurs, Kazakhs, Kyrgyz, and other Turkic peoples as genocide and crimes against humanity. Despite repeated calls by numerous organizations and parliaments, the UN Commission on Human Rights has failed to publish a proper report on the situation in East Turkestan, yet alone even investigate China's ongoing genocide. If the UN is unwilling to investigate an individual governments and parliaments' recognition of China's atrocities against Uyghurs/Turkic peoples, as genocide cannot produce enough pressure to convince the Chinese government to stop, then what can? Will the world continue to issue symbolic condemnations and recognitions, or will it act to implement its treaty obligations under the UN Convention on the Prevention and Punishment of the Crime of Genocide? Every year, as part of International Holocaust Remembrance Day, governments, politicians, corporations, and leaders of organizations, and the elites of the world, including businessmen and celebrities, took to social media to reiterate their annual vows to never again. Never again is happening right now, right this very second, in occupied East Turkestan. If governments are genuine in their vows to never again, they must fulfill their treaty obligations to prevent and punish the perpetrators of the greatest humanitarian crisis of our century, China's ongoing genocide in East Turkestan. In June 2020, the East Turkestan government in exile and the East Turkestan National Awakening Movement filed a legal complaint urging the ICC to investigate and prosecute Chinese officials for genocide. Governments, including the government of Canada, must pressure the International Criminal Court to start investigations before it's too late. Furthermore, governments, including Canada, must also file a parallel case at the International Court of Justice. Additionally, it's been 17 years since Hussein Jilin, an Uyghur Canadian citizen, has been unlawfully imprisoned in China. The Canadian government continues to fail to protect its own citizens. We again call on Canada's government to secure the immediate release of Canadian citizen Hussein Jilin. We also urge the government of Canada to uphold its commitments to freedom and human rights by supporting East Turkestan and its peoples, by recognizing East Turkestan as an occupied country, accepting more Uyghur refugees, and being a voice of freedom and justice at the international stage. We again urge Canada to call on the ICC to start its investigations of Chinese officials for the ongoing genocide and other crimes against humanity in East Turkestan. Failure to support East Turkestan people's legal efforts to end the ongoing genocide and obtain justice will only show that the vows of never again and commitments to human rights and justice are nothing but empty vows. What's even worse, the lack of an international investigation will only embolden China to continue its brutal attempts to eradicate the Uyghurs. As Holocaust survivor Ali Weigel stated, we must take sides. Neutrality helps the oppressor, never the victim. Silence encourages the tormentor, never the tormented. Governments need to break their silence and voice their support for an international investigation to be carried out regarding China's ongoing genocide and crimes against humanity against the Uyghur and other Turkic peoples of East Turkestan. Thank you.
Thank you, Nurami. Thank you very much. Right now, I'm inviting myself to call East Turkestani people to resist Chinese occupation and Chinese colonization, and again Chinese genocide, China's genocide. This speech will be in Uyghur because I am calling Uyghur people, East Turkestani people to resist Chinese occupation. Assalamu alaikum Sharqiy Turkiston xalqi. Assalamu alaikum muhajiratdagi barliq aziz qarindoshlar. Hamma vaqtimiz xayrli bo'lsin. Xususan bu Ramazon oyimiz xayrli bo'lsin. Qarindoshlar, bugun 2023-yil 4-oyning 5-kuni. Bugun Ramazonning 14-kuni. Shundaqla Barin inqilobining 33-yillik xotira kuni. Bu kun Sharqiy Turkiston tarixidagi eng ahamiyatli kunlarning biri. Chunki 33 yil burun naq bugungi kunda vatanimiz Sharqiy Turkistonda Barin inqilobi portlagan kun. Bu kunda Xitoy tajovuzchilarining chekimlashgan zulmiga chidab bo'lolmagan Sharqiy Turkiston xalqi Xitoy tajovuzchilarining planli tug'ish siyosati ostiga yushirilgan irqiy qirg'inchilik siyosatiga shundaqla buvoq qatlamiga qarshi urush e'lon qilgan kun. Hammamizning Ramazon oyimiz muborak bo'lsin. Bu oyda qilgan ibodatlarimiz maqbul bo'lsin va barcha shahidlarimizning ruhi shod bo'lsin. Amin. Qarindoshlar, Ramazon oyining bu kunlari odatdan tashqari ulug' kunlar bo'lib, bu kunlarda samimiy qilingan har qanday duo ijobat bo'ladi va har qanday tilak qabul bo'ladi. Shuning uchun bu ulug' kunlarda xususan bugun barcha inqilobchilarga duo qilaylik. Vatandagi mazlum qarindoshlarimizga duo qilaylik. Vatanimiz Sharqiy Turkistonning mustaqilligini tezroq aslaga keltirishimizga duo qilaylik. Biz Payg'ambar alayhissalomni rahbarimiz deydiganmiz, bu Ramazonni cho'qim duo qilish, ibodat qilish, gunohlarimizdan pushaymon qilish, tavba qilish, istig'for aytish va Allohga yolverish bilan o'tkazishimiz lozim. Chunki biz Alloh taolo tarafidan bu dunyoda dushmanga qarshi kurash qilib, oxiratni qozonsin va jahannamdan qutulsin deb berilgan hayotimizni dushmanga qarshi kurash qilmaslik, shundaqla kurash qilgan qahramonlarimizga ega chiqmaslik bilan barbod qildik. Eng yomoni Bu dünya hayatımızın korgunu olan ana vatanımız Şarkı Türkistan, yüzümüzün boşanlıkıdan, düşmanımız Xitay tecavüzçilere terpidin besilindi. Ve biz öz hakkımız olan bu vatanını qaytarıp alamıdık. Şuna biz millet sütüde, tarihte hiç kimin beşeri kelmegen zulüm ve irqi qırgınçılık aslında yaşayavatımız. Ve Xitay bizning maddi ve manevi hamma narsamizga tajovuz qildi. Ve ahiretligimizga buzg'unchilik qildi. Dünya ve ahiretligimizga buzg'unchilik qildi. Qo'limizda bor bo'lgan hamma narsamizni bo'ldi, taladi. İslam dinimizga tajovuz qildi. Aqidamizni buzdi. Ma'naviy muqaddasotlarimizni dafsanda qildi. Milliy ar-nomusimizni chayladi. Millatimizga, vatanimizga ve dinimizga doir her narsamizga hujum qildi. Ya'ni ana vatanimizni qo'ldan berib qo'yish, shundaqla barin ruhidan o'rganmaslik ve düşmanga qarshi kurash qilmaslik bizni bu dunyoda xor qilganidek oxiratimizni qazanadigan butun shart-sharoitlarni qo'limizdan oldi. Mana shunday bir amaliyot aslida butun dunyo tarafidan tashlanib bütün dünya tarafından taşlanıp yetim kalganlığımızı his kılıp, acizliğimizni qabul qilib, xorlikda yaşayotganligimizni iqror qilib, xatoligimizni e'tirof qilib ve gunohlarimizga tövbe qilib, barin şehitlerini eslab ve örnek elib, muşuluk kunlardimi bo'lsa dua qilishga ve yaratgan egimizga bizga yordam berishiga yalverishga yaramasa, beşimizga kelgan bu achinishlik ve ibretlik oqibatdan qutulib ketish mumkin emas. Cenab-ı Allah bu hakta Kur'an-ı Kerim'de Sure Furqan'ın en ahir ayetinde bize mudaktan kitap kılıdır. Ularga degin ki, eğer duayınla bulmasa, mening Rabbim sizlarga qandaq echinishlik aqabatni qilishinglardan qat'iy nazar pisand qilmaydi. Sizlar zodi to'g'rini inkor qilib bo'ldinglar. U inkorning natijasi albatta sizlarni tutadi. Qarindoshlar, mana shunday bir ahvol ostida düşmanimiz Xitoy tajovuzchilari bilan kurash qilish, hatto tig'mi-tig' elishish insoniy nuqtadan mecburiy bir vazifadir. Diniy nuqtadan farzdir. Vijdoniy nuqtadan burch, axloqiy nuqtadan bir shon-sharafdir. Düşmanimiz Xitoyga qarshi kurash qilmasak ve qo'limizdan kelganini qilmasak, imoniy vazifamizni ado qilmaganligimiz uchun munofiq bo'lamiz. Vicdani burcumuzni ado qilmaganligimiz uchun xoin bo'lamiz. İnsani ve ahlaki vazifamizni ado qilmaganligimiz uchun sharafsiz bo'lamiz. Halbuki Allah bizni bu dunyoga musulmoncha sharafli yashab, ibodat orqali Allohni rozi qilib, shundaqla bu dunyoni gullantirib, dunyo va oxiratda baxt bo'lishimiz uchun yaratgan. Qarindoshlar, barin inqilobidan o'rnak olaylik. Barin ruhidan o'rganaylik. Bizga buningdan boshqa chiqish yo'li yo'q. Vatan qutuldirish, ishg'olchilarga qarshi urush qilish dunyoning hech bir qonunida xato emas. Biz barin ruhiga varislik qila olganda bizga Allohning marhamati keladi. Berkat darvozasi ochiladi. Do'stligimiz va ittifoqligimiz bir surib chiqadi. Allohning marhamatiga erisha olsaklar, Allah bizga har qanday vosita bilan yordam berishadi. U chog'da hozir taqilib qolgan darvozalarning hammasi ochiladi. Bahar mezgilida hamma narsa tirilgandek, Xitoy tajovuzchilari tarafidan o'ldirilgan barliq moddiy va ma'naviy fursatlar tiriladi. Ruhiy va ma'naviy boyligimiz asliga keladi. Shuning uchun biz o'z inqilobchilarimizga ega chiqaylik. Vatanning mustaqilligini asliga keltirish yo'lida birlashaylik. Barin ruhidan o'rganaylik. Yaratgan mehribon Allah hammamizga iymon, hidoyat, g'ayrat, jasorat, mehr, muhabbat, ilm, ma'rifat, maqbul ibodat ve aql farosat ato qilsin. Bizni hayot chig'imizda islomiyatdan ve o'ladigan chig'imizda tavba ve iymondan ayirmasin. Amin. Sharqiy Turkiston Cumhuriyeti Cumhur Reis ishxonasi. Qarindoshlar, boshqa so'zlaydiganlar bo'lsa kelsanlar, so'z haqqi berildi. Eğer so'zlaydiganlar bo'lmasa, Muhammed Emin'ni bugungi shuarni to'lashga taklif qilaman.
What are you doing? Why do you care so much?
Act now, Canada!
Act now, Canada!
Act now, Canada! Act against Chinese imperialism! Act against Chinese imperialism! Act against Chinese colonism! Act against Chinese colonism! Act against China's Uyghur genocide! Act against China's Uyghur genocide! Act against Chinese occupation! Act against Chinese occupation! Condemn Chinese invasion of East Turkestan! Condemn Chinese invasion of East Turkestan! Condemn Chinese occupation of East Turkestan! Condemn Chinese occupation of East Turkestan! Condemn the 1990 Baran massacre! Condemn the 1990 Baran massacre! Take China to the Hague! Take China to the Hague! Take China to the ICC! Take China to the ICC! Take China to the ICJ!
Take China to the ICJ!
Take China to the ICJ!
Take China to the ICJ!
Recognize East Turkestan as an occupied country! Recognize East Turkestan as an occupied country! Recognize China as a terrorist state! Recognize China as a terrorist state! Intervene to end the Uyghur genocide! Intervene to end the Uyghur genocide! Intervene to end Chinese colonization! Intervene to end Chinese colonization! Intervene to end Chinese occupation! Intervene to end Chinese occupation! Intervene to save East Turkestan! Intervene to save East Turkestan! Fascist China!
Fascist China!
Fascist China!
Fascist China!
Racist China!
Racist China!
Racist China!
Racist China!
Terrorist China!
Terrorist China!
Terrorist China!
Terrorist China!
Imperialist China! Imperialist China! 73 years is enough! 73 years is enough! Go home, China!
Go home, China!
Go home, China!
Go home, China!
China, get out of East Turkestan! China, get out of East Turkestan! China, stop the genocide! China, stop the genocide! China, end the colonization! China, end the colonization! China, end the occupation! China, end the occupation! We want our independence back! We want our independence back! End Chinese occupation! End Chinese occupation! End Chinese imperialism! End Chinese imperialism! Recognize East Turkestan as an occupied country! Recognize East Turkestan as an occupied country! Support East Turkestan independence! independence. Support East Turkestan independence. Act now, Canada. Act now, Canada. Act against Chinese imperialism. Act against Chinese imperialism. Act against Chinese colonism. Act against Chinese colonism. Act against China's Uyghur genocide. Act against China's Uyghur genocide. Act against Chinese occupation. Act against Chinese occupation. Condemn the Chinese invasion of East Turkestan. Condemn Chinese invasion of East Turkestan. Condemn Chinese occupation of East Turkestan. Condemn Chinese occupation of East Turkestan. Condemn the 1990 Baron Massacre. Condemn the 1990 Baron Massacre. Take China to the Hague. Take China to the Hague. Take China to the